Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the City of Palm Rivers Committee of the Whole meeting for Tuesday, October 17, 2023. I acknowledge that we are holding this meeting on the traditional territory of the Tla'amin people who have lived here for thousands of years, and personally delighted that we get to live here too. Some of us, as we have for many years ourselves. So thank you for all being here. First item is adoption of the agenda. Any changes, additions, Mr. Corporate Officer?
Thank you, Chair. There is a new piece of correspondence to replace the old that is in the agenda package from BC Transit. So Council can choose to either add this as a light item and swap it out. And Mr. Ringba from BC Transit is also available to answer questions. Alternatively, you could just pull that from the agenda and we can add it to the next one if you like. Now we have an opportunity to read it in advance.
8 choices like that. What is Council's pleasure? Councilor Fong?
I would like to ask the Council to exchange documents and proceed with the presentation today.
Thank you. Is that me? Councilor Almeida?
I just have one question. Is the change in document primarily focused around the image that is different, or is there much difference in the text?
Yeah, it's I think it's significant change.
It's a whole new location.
Yeah, it certainly is, Chair.
Councilor Doug?
I'd suggest, Chair, that we go with what we've got. We've got a new attachment that none of us have had a chance to read, but we do have Mr. Ringma here in person who can guide us through it, and we can delay our decision later if we don't like what we hear.
And we know him very well, and we have had fun with him in the past. So does everybody agree with Councilor Dowd's suggestion?
Yes.
Okay, by unanimous consent, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Corporate Officer. Any other changes to the agenda? Seeing none, motion to adopt. Councilor Elliott, Councilor Isaacson, all in favor? Unanimous, thank you. Adoption of minutes of the regular committee of the whole meeting held October 3, 2023. Councilor, motion to adopt. Councilor Elliott, Councilor Isaacson, any comments with regard to those minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? Unanimous, thank you. On to delegations. Julie Jenkins, Housing Services Manager at Lyft Community Services regarding the 2023 Cadet Region Homeless Count. Ms. Jenkins, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Happy to here for a minute. Oh, great. I apologize to staff for sending my slides a little late today, so thank you for accommodating that. Hello, Mayor and Council. It's nice to see you all. Thanks for having me today. I think I know most of you, but for those in the room that I don't know, my name is Julie Jenkins, and I'm the Housing Services Manager at Lyft. And I'm here today to present on the results of the first ever point-in-time homeless count in our region, which Lyft, in partnership with the Homelessness Services Association of BC and several local community partners, conducted in April of this year. And the results were released a couple weeks ago. We wanted to participate in this count to have concrete data local to our region that we could share with our municipal partners, like the city, the regional district, Tla'amin Nation, and other civil society groups who are working to address homelessness in the community, and also to give some data to our provincial and federal partners to really understand what's going on here in the community. And I think we all know from what we see in the streets and what we hear from others that the housing crisis in our community, like in the rest of the province, is growing. What the point-in-time homeless count does is give us some concrete numbers to really understand some of the nuances of what's happening there, so we can target limited resources in the right direction and know that we're planning ahead for the appropriate emergency response. There we go. Sorry about that. So I'm going to start just with an overview about what the 2023 provincial point-in-time homeless count is. I'll go over the methodology, and then get into how we operationalize the homeless count here in Cathett, and spend most of my time talking about the results. So we'll go through the data in that handout that I believe was included in the minutes today. I'll end with some context in terms of what we as a local service provider are seeing on the ground in our services, and some opportunities to respond. So this homeless count that happened in April in Cathett was part of a provincial-wide point-in-time homeless count that happens every year. So there were numerous counts happened across the province between March and early May 2023. Those counts are administered by a provincial nonprofit called the Homelessness Services Association of BC in partnership with local partners. So they work with local organizations on the ground. But the count is really overseen, designed, enumerated, and shared and controlled by that provincial nonprofit. The homeless counts are designed to collect information about who is experiencing homelessness and identify long-term trends in housing needs in individual communities across the province. This year, there were 20 provincially funded counts across BC, and ours was one of them. There were also 2 federally funded counts, one in Greater Vancouver and one in Greater Victoria. So if you've looked at the data and you've noticed like the amount of data that there is in Vancouver and Victoria, it's different than in the smaller communities because it's a different process that's funded through the federal government. And as I mentioned, 2023 was the first time that our region has participated in this count. We get lots of questions about methodology, so I thought I'd go into that a little bit. As I mentioned, the count is designed and overseen by HSABC, so we don't get to kind of make the rules, and Cindy's laughing, and I wonder in part because she was part of this, and maybe also because she's here in the picture on the screen, and was one of the volunteers who helped out on April 17th with the count there at the library. And Cindy's seated there with a person with lived experience from our shelter who helped with the count, and a staff member who helped that day as well. This model of kind of deploying volunteers, staff members, outreach workers, community agencies, so that there's kind of all hands on deck to reach people and count them on the day of the count is something that is part of the methodology that's designed by HSABC. Just going to go through the rest of that. There's a central definition used for the province. And so they consider someone homeless if they don't have a place to pay rent where they can expect to stay for the next 30 days. And that definition is important because yes, it does include people sleeping in vehicles. It does include people who have been evicted and don't have a place to go at the end of the month. It does include people who are couch surfing. It does include people who are staying with family members without a rental agreement. So it does include many of those kind of precariously quasi-housed people, and that's important in a rural community like ours because we know much of our homelessness is hidden and falls into those categories. I've used the term point in time count, and that's important. The homeless count is a snapshot of homelessness in a given community within a single 24-hour period. So the numbers that we see is not everybody who meets that definition. It's everybody that we could identify and count in 24 hours. It's always an undercount for that reason. So this is really the minimum number of people who were experiencing homelessness in our community on April 17th. The data is collected from shelters and no fixed address data the night before. And so that's jails, hospital, detox centers, and shelters, as well as administered by trained volunteers and agencies on the day of the count. And so what did we do here in Cathett? The count happened on the evening of April 16th, and that's when those numbers are pulled from those sheltered locations that I just mentioned. And the day of April 17th, and that's when we're trying to locate people and get them to answer the survey. HSABC staff were present here in town to oversee the count. So they trained our volunteers in the morning, they collected the surveys from the volunteers, they made sure that everything was happening according to the methodology, and they took those surveys away back to the Lower Mainland where they were validated and enumerated alongside other provinces. And we received the numbers on this, I think, a day before Mayor and Council did, which was a couple days before they were released publicly. We took a multi-pronged approach here in Cathett, knowing that it would be hard to find people and count them. And so how do we do that? There's a little mini version of the poster and flyer that we handed out up on the screen, but we had stations set up at the Community Resource Center on Joyce, in the lobby of the library, and in Siam and in Tushosam in the Ajamet Clubhouse. We also had a call-in survey over the phone, so people could call in if they were living in a vehicle. Hopefully they saw our poster and called in on the day. That's something that's worked in other rural communities and that we tried here as well. Local agencies were recruited and asked to contact their clients if they had clients who they knew met this criteria. And then we had a full team of volunteers, community partners, and people with lived experience who covered the region on foot and vehicle from Lund to Sultry Bay. It's important to mention that we did not make it to Texada during this count, and we also learned a lot of things, I think, through this first count about how we could do a more thorough count next time. We worked with some official community partners, including Common Nation, Vancouver Coastal Health, and the library, who helped us. And in terms of Common and BCH, they really helped us through their staff who work with this population to locate people. And the library, of course, allowed us to host that table there. We also sent out information and surveys, and HSABC worked with other local nonprofits in town to make sure they had access to the surveys and could reach their members. So I'm going to dive into the results. I'm going to go through this rather quickly, and then we can answer questions at the end. But as you've probably seen, 126 people in our community were identified as experiencing homelessness through the count. To be counted, you have to answer a question: where did you sleep last night? And that's where we get this data of where people were the night of the count. So 26% of people in our community were sheltered. The definition of that means that they were either staying at our emergency shelter that Lyft operates, at the transition house, or in hospital, jail, or a detox facility with no fixed address. 74% were considered unsheltered, so that's 3/4. Half of those people were staying at someone else's place, which bears out in what we kind of know about hidden homelessness in rural communities. So half of those unsheltered folks were couch surfing or staying with someone else. 29% stayed in a vehicle, 9% stayed in a makeshift shelter or tent. 60% were men, 40% were women, 74% adults, 18% seniors, 9% youth, and 10% of respondents identified as being a member of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. The survey asked about Indigenous identity, and 18% of respondents here in our community were Indigenous. That's compared with 6% of the census population. So we're seeing what we know from national and provincial data and data from other communities, that Indigenous people are really vastly overrepresented in the homeless community. Of that 18%, 60% of Indigenous identifying respondents reported as having either lived or generational experience with residential schools. The part that's, I think, really interesting for us in terms of planning for housing needs and response is some of these questions about experiences with homelessness. So the survey asked a question about reasons for housing loss. 41% lost their housing due to not having enough income, 20% due to a substance use issue, and 20% due to a landlord-tenant conflict. Length of time experiencing homelessness, 80% of respondents have been homeless for over a year. And I think that number just kind of confirms what a lot of service providers on the ground know, which is that there's a growing chronic homelessness population in our community, and our homelessness response services are no longer emergency service and rehousing. It's people staying in that demographic for a long time because the housing's not available. On the other side, 8% had lost their housing in the last 6 months. The survey also asked a question about the connection to the local community, and I thought this answer was really interesting. So 54% of respondents, over half, have always been here. 85% have been here for 5 or more years, and 91% have been here for more than a year. So the remaining 9% we can presume has either been here for less than a year or didn't answer that question. We know that housing is a major social determinant of health, and so it's not surprising, although it is staggering, to see some of these health concerns that the respondents reported. 39% reported having a medical condition, 34% a physical disability, 56% a mental health concern, 72% reported an addiction, and 21% a learning disability. 31%, this is a new question this year, reported an acquired brain injury, and that's something that service providers are increasingly talking about due to its connection with the toxic drug crisis and the increase in populations that are homeless who also have an acquired brain injury. And 64% reported 2 or more health concerns. Finally, they ask about services accessed in the last year. And so this is interesting as well, and kind of gives some insight into which services locally this population is accessing most. 74% have accessed community food services, 62% have accessed emergency room, 51% have accessed a safe consumption site. Locally, we're an overdose prevention site, same thing. And in terms of where people have stayed in the past year, 64% have stayed at a homeless shelter, 66% at someone else's place, and 56% in a vehicle. And you could select more than one answer to that question. I pulled some data from comparison communities, and these reports are all available online, and I think it would probably be interesting to get a bit more granular with this. But these communities were selected due to their proximity to our community, and some of them having like fairly comparable populations to Cuthbert, with the exception, of course, of the Comox Valley, which has a larger population. You'll see there the numbers. The first one in green is Powell River. Our count was 126 individuals. Port Alberni was 163. Sechelt Gibsons, and that count included the whole Sunshine Coast Regional District, was 97. The Comox Valley, 272, and Parksville Qualicum, 103. I did crunch these numbers and they didn't end up on my slides, but in terms of per capita homelessness, I think Port Alberni is the only community that's ahead of Powell River there. Here's a comparison of demographics compared to other communities. And again, this just provides a little bit of a snapshot about what might be unique that's going on here in our community. And so we're seeing seniors lower than some other communities, but a bit higher than Port Alberni. We have the highest percentage of women as the proportion of our homeless population compared to other communities, which might speak to some of the types of housing that we have available for people. Youth were around average, so there are some communities with more youth and some with lower, and youth are actually really hard to find in these homeless counts. They're usually underrepresented, and that might be what's going on here in our data. And then finally, the Indigenous population in Cuthbert, while it is a gross overrepresentation of the census data, that percentage is lower than other communities, and to a significant degree from some. So I wanted to put these numbers in context of what we're kind of seeing on the ground at the shelter. And of course, we partnered with HSABC on these numbers, but I also work on the ground with our local emergency shelter. And I was able to pull some data yesterday from our BC Housing database. And the numbers are very similar. So the emergency shelter is open 24/7, thanks to your support still, with 20 beds for all genders. And in the last year, so between October 15th, 2022 and October 15th, 2023, the average nightly capacity was 95%. The shelter was full or over capacity 45% of nights. And you might wonder that those numbers seem a little off, like how is it 95 if it wasn't full more than half the time? It's because when we were over capacity, especially over the winter, we were at like 120%. So you're seeing a balance off of those numbers. I think the important thing to remember there is almost half of nights we didn't have room for anyone extra and we're turning people away. So every other night in the past year, we were turning people away. The shelter served 137 unique individuals, which is a handful more than were counted in the homeless count. And so I think that kind of shows you a couple of things. One, that those populations are not the same, but two, just to confirm that it is an undercount. 60% were male, which is actually the exact same number that we got in the count here. 33 were female percent. 6% didn't disclose their gender during their intake, and 1% identified as other than male or female. And 15% of clients who've come to the shelter in the past year were Indigenous. Of course, I'd like to just end by highlighting some service gaps that we see and some observations about what might be happening from my place as the housing services manager at LIFT. And the first one, of course, is shelter spaces. The shelter is really full right now already, and the weather's getting colder and wetter. And with those numbers, something that we're concerned about is shelter spaces this winter. We don't have an official warming center right now that we're aware of, and that's something to consider planning for as we go into the colder, wetter months. And then amenities and access to services. So despite there being a really good network of amenities and services provided by nonprofits and the library and the complex, there are still gaps there in terms of access to showers, washrooms, garbage and sharps disposal, phone and internet access, laundry, transportation, and food security. And we found some of those gaps mended really well during COVID due to emergency funds that came through the province and actually through the city as well with the Strengthening Communities Grant. And those kind of incidental funds drying up has revealed some of those gaps that have been there all along. In terms of the housing continuum, something that is a big factor at play here, at least on our seat, is just the lack of affordable market housing is really putting pressure on subsidized and supportive options. So when you're looking at the housing continuum, there's sort of a trickle down effect that we're seeing there with the pressure at the bottom with this population not being able to get into supportive housing or affordable housing because those spaces are taken up by people who are not able to get into the market housing anymore. And then again, targeted options are really needed and is something that we probably need to focus on more as a community to serve some of the diverse populations that we're seeing here, including youth, seniors, women, Indigenous peoples, and people with specific health concerns, including brain injury. And I would add to that people in recovery or who don't use substances, in addition to the harm reduction focused services that we have. So in conclusion, I just wanted to share my gratitude to the city on behalf of LIFT and our partners who worked on the count with us and work in this sector every day for your support on the efforts that we've kind of taken together to address homelessness in Quebec. These numbers offer insight into homelessness in our region. And we're hoping that annual data will allow us to track trends over time and be a bit more targeted and evidence-based in what we do with our approach to housing and homelessness services. There is an urgent need for more housing options in Quebec still, and immediate emergency measures to keep people alive and safe this winter is something that's on our minds. I just want to end by sharing some things that LIFT is working on with you. One is just that we're committed to continuing to work with HSABC and local partners to make the Homeless Count an annual event. So this data will be available annually and we'll be able to track what's happening longitudinally in our community. We're exploring opportunities with BC Housing to add emergency shelter beds to our capacity this winter in an emergency weather response program. So when certain weather criteria are met, we would be able to bring additional staff on and put mats down. And I'll be coming back to council to speak about that once I know exactly what the opportunity is there. We anticipate an update about the availability of additional rent subsidies in our region very soon. So we did apply for more rent subsidies last year, and we anticipate an announcement on that very soon, which is a great option for people who have capacity to be in market rental housing, but just don't have the income, which, as we saw, was a pretty significant population here. And finally, we remain a willing partner to address these immediate service gaps with council and other community partners this winter and long-term looking into housing. And I think I would just add at that it's funny to talk about numbers. I think they're really helpful, but behind the numbers, there are stories and people who we know about. And I think on the ground, in terms of my team and the people that we support every day, it's a lot of people who are needing some immediate help. And I think there's some urgent action that we can take as a community to be more collaborative and fill some of those gaps. So thank you very much. And I'm open to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. Questions, comments? Councillor Elliott and Councillor Essex.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Jenkins. Your efforts. And you, people who volunteered that day and participated. I thought I would share sort of my experience in doing that a little bit for everybody. There were people who clearly fit the criteria filling out that survey that we were not able to convince. So I know that count is really low. Among them were single women pregnant who just didn't want to be filling out forms. Our system isn't good for women who are worried about homelessness, who might be worried about having their child taken from them when they delivered. And that was the saddest thing that happened, was for me to learn that we have a system that makes this person afraid to get help, to be counted, to put her hand up. So I just wanted to share, we don't get to count everybody when we do this. Some people who are super vulnerable are not letting themselves be counted, They're not staying in the shelter. They're staying as far away from where people can recognize and see them as possible. And she just wanted to know if there was a place or a way she could sometimes get warm, but she was so cold all the time.
Sure. So many things that also the same. This week, there are a number of big partners that work towards solutions on this application. And so I want to thank it's very difficult. Anyways, I think it's very hard, to exist in a world that's facing a lot of crises right now. And so that's a fact. And the question is, what do we do about it now? And it's very much a choice on how we respond. And I'd like to choose compassion and human rights things. The number is obviously undercounted, but even being undercounted, it's tragic, and it's also, I think, something to work with and to strive towards. And so I would ask for more, from council, but also from more agencies to think about what their potential role can be played. I know the spillover impacts of homelessness, it impacts everyone in our community, and sometimes that means that maybe an agency doesn't want to get into servicing a homeless population because of the impacts to their reputation or to their relationship to the broader community, and we need to figure out a way through that. And so obviously we all need to be a part of the solution, both in the long term, but also on an emergency basis. And so I want to focus in on this emergency basis right now. Maybe this is a question more for planning staff. I know that there are some types of buildings or land uses that are already, that don't require a lot of work for groups to step up to be a warming shelter or the warming place for five shelter. Those are one of those places. I'm wondering, in terms of who are the easiest types of buildings or agencies that can step in to play a role in terms of land use, and I'm wondering if there's a bit of insight into like who is easiest to step up. City could be, I don't know if that's planning staff or Julie question, but.
Through the chair, property zone institutional have assembly use as one of the permitted uses, and so that would be an immediate ability to gather warmth. So churches and other city-owned structures typically fall under that institutional.
And second question, in terms of regional collaboration, can you speak to the existence of like roundtables or collective action approaches? I know I've heard reference to them, but being on council, I'm not totally aware.
Yeah, I think that's a major gap and opportunity for our community, is to have a collaborative table that comes together with civil society and local governments to really think through creative solutions. There was a really great housing roundtable going that was facilitated by the social planner. With the absence of the social planner, that's become a real gap. And I think there is a role that the city could play in trying to get those types of collaborative tables going again and bringing nonprofits and other diverse interest groups together to work on solutions. I know many other communities have homelessness action committees or even a homelessness strategy at the city level that can kind of help guide the next steps in terms of response in a more kind of strategic long-term way. And I think that's something that we would love to see as a community partner and participate in.
Thank you, Councillor Dove.
So thanks for coming. Thanks for doing this. And thanks for letting us know about it and and looking into it. There's a lot in this report, the short handout that is in our package. It's shorter than the presentation. I'd like to have a copy of the presentation you made this afternoon. I think there's some important things in that, particularly the next steps, the discussion about a cold weather shelter and all those things. Because it's nice to think that the cold weather is a long way away, but it's not. A couple of weeks away, and there are not fewer people that are going to need cold weather shelters this year than there were last year. There are a lot more people that are going to be looking for shelter, and we're going to need to find some place for people to go. And so if you could forward us that information, I'd appreciate that very much. I think your input about the social planner is well made. If we had a social planner, we could task the social planner with getting together a table of groups that are interested in doing something about all of these things, get them working together. So hopefully with this information, we can get together and do more and try to see if we can think about a day where we might actually see number of homeless people declining instead of continuing to go on. Thanks for coming.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. To help council do strategic planning on homelessness, you have a trend line that would show over the last 10 years in Powell River, the number of homelessness and also how many of those related to addiction as being part of the issue for their homelessness.
We don't have that data because this is the first year that we have participated in the homeless count, and we don't have the past 10 years of consistently operating the same type of homeless services to pull that data from, unfortunately. So that's one of the reasons why we were so motivated to partner with HSABC on this survey this year, and over time we'll be able to have that data. Right now, when we bring numbers, we're able to ask the homeless outreach worker at the hospital what their caseload is and kind of hobble numbers together based on shelter capacity and things like that. But because the methodology isn't consistent over time, it's not a good comparison, fortunately. And it doesn't get into those types of granular demographic and health concern questions such as addiction.
Got a couple of questions and maybe a comment or two. With regard to a roundtable, there was a housing group basically that existed when I first started on council in 2014. It was championed by then Councillor Hathaway, who is no longer sitting at this table. And I don't believe that group has met since at least a year ago. So I think that I detect some interest at this table, and there could be probably some conversations that go on between some of us here to investigate whether they're all the people in the community who were part of that. And it really represented quite a real cross section of people who had interest in housing, including real estate and agents and a whole spectrum. So there is possibility of something like that starting up again, thanks to interest and the information you brought to us. And I'm particularly interested in your brief mention of the housing trickle-down effect. I think many of us are aware of what's going on in our society. In our province over the past 2 years, our population has increased by 250,000. If that doesn't suggest a reason for pushing so many people down into this disadvantaged condition, the connection is obvious to me. I also have a question with regard to the data. Do you have a more comprehensive report that you could send us? I really appreciate this, but there is data, as Councillor Dowd mentioned, in your PowerPoint here that isn't included in what's attached to our agenda. Was that a consolidation of a larger report that possibly could be available to us?
No, unfortunately not. So the data that I reported is all in that 2-pager with the exemption of the shelter data that I reported from our shelter on the last page. We didn't give you the data from the other communities as well, and I can circulate that link when I circulate the slides. It's a good question. I will reach out to our contact at HSABC and ask if there's access to a larger report. I suspect that there's not because they haven't shared that with us as well. Share these highlights.
One more question with regard to shelter. It's been observed many times in the past that shelter is not home. I mean, it's a long ways from home. It's only that far from homelessness. But you mentioned a plan that BC Housing basically has some plan available, and I wonder if you could. The specific question is, are we assured that that there could be some kind of facility? And there have been various options from Salvation Army to the old Faith Lutheran Church over the years here. Is there something in sight that could be used or something that is potential for us this winter?
In terms of
Because
sheltering?
it's better than nothing, that's for sure.
Yeah, so in terms of sheltering, I was hoping to have a more concrete answer before this meeting, and I don't, but I should by the end of the week from BC Housing in terms of how to get access to additional beds, and they base that on our shelter data for the last year. So they're looking at that and have heard our ask for the need. In terms of what LIFT can support with, there is a possibility for that BC Housing would fund additional staffing and food resources and cleaning resources if we were able to use our existing sites to put mats down when certain weather criteria are met. So we're looking at the Community Resource Center as an option for that. Of course, it would need to come back to council for a temporary use permit, and that would only be on an emergency basis. And in other communities, it's when we get below zero or a certain amount of precipitation that those facilities would open up on a nightly basis, really to prevent people from dying. It's quite dire in terms of what that intervention is for. In terms of other community partners stepping up, I know churches in the past have done that. It's not, they had stepped away from that in the past, and it might be interesting to open up that conversation. Again, I think there is a real need for different operators in terms of shelter spaces and for different operators who are targeting different populations because it's hard to shelter everybody in the same space.
Councilor Palmer.
Yeah, thank you, through Chair. I really appreciate you being here today and sharing your statistics with us. Councillor Southcott brought up an interesting point. At one time, we did have a committee that met regularly and discussed homelessness and what we were going to do about it and all the ramifications. That hasn't gone on for some time now, and sitting here, I have to ask myself the question: Are we living in isolation in Powell River and just dealing with our own issues? Your reference here on your slide point to other communities and their statistics. Is there been dialogue with these other communities and to come up with perhaps some creative ideas that may be out there that if we were to strike a committee, you could share with that committee and perhaps we can come up with some concrete ideas?
I think that's a great idea. I was on the island the week before last and was able to visit a shelter and talk to some operators on the island at a roundtable facilitated by BC Housing and made some good connections there. And it's a really great reminder. I think we often try to think of solutions for our community and forget that there are lots of models out there that work, and there's definitely things that we could learn from other committees. I think on the nonprofit side, we do connect with other operators through roundtables and working groups that are facilitated by HSABC and the BC Nonprofit Housing Association and the like. I'm curious if there were any connections that happened through UBCM or if there are ways to kind of bring those groups together so that it's not civil society and municipalities kind of operating in isolation. But that's a great question. I think there's more needed.
I'd like to see that dialogue and communication come together in some way, shape, or form. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Hendrickson.
I have a motion I would say. I think I got it pretty succinct. So one would be to direct staff to report back on reconvening the housing roundtable. And that would be like the stop. And that could include like, what are the possibilities and what's happened and if staffing is needed. This might impact that social planner role that's been at for quite a while, but my core, the motion is to report, for staff to report back on reconvening the housing roundtable.
Second for that, Councillor Elliott. Discussion on the motion. Elliott.
I used to attend the housing roundtable periodically, and it was many of the nonprofit housing operators within the city. And I think we had a better representation from developers as well. We were trying to link the whole housing development and the nature housing around table discussion. I thought it was an excellent roundtable. I think what would help it is some sort of secretariat or ability to retain records from meeting to meeting and that are not entirely done ad hoc at the roundtable. So that's just a comment. I like the motion. Social planner was there. She was definitely helped. The roundtable predated social planner. And much of the work was done by Councillor Hathaway herself. So that's a model that's shown to fall down as soon as the people change. So
yeah, and I'd support this motion. I think it's a good idea. With enough people in the community that are interested in trying to do something, get people together is always a good idea. It could be, we'll get a report if this motion passes from city staff about how to put that together. It could be led by a person from council, or if we had a social planner, it could be led by a social planner. The key to that is having somebody, a staff member of the city who has resources, actually do things to get people together and to do all of the paperwork and things that come together to make a roundtable like that actually work, have meetings at appropriate times and get minutes out to people and talk about it. So, I'd like to see a report on this. I'd like to get the community organizations together to work on the issue because it's an important one.
I have a comment. That, in my memory, and I have a folder with years and years of minutes from meetings, because I did attend that roundtable as well. The success of it was because there was a champion. And that is as compared to staff supporter or staff support. Our staff really has limited capacity. So I'm mindful of being very considerate of that and would certainly want to see that consideration in whatever staff might bring us. It's on that condition that I would support this this motion, and I think some of us here would be highly willing to participate and fill in that, what was that previous role that Councillor Hathaway filled as champion. So that could probably bear some discussion, possibly before staff. Yeah. And secretary for a lot of years. So with Councillor Isaacson? Yeah,
to speak on that point, I know I personally have on my list of things to do as related to council is a desire to, as a councillor, reach out to leadership within the faith community and other institutionally zoned places to just open the discussion and assess willingness and try to make connections. And so I think I want to move forward on that, but also if there's 7 of us who all have our own interests trying to make those connections, it makes much better sense for that to be convened in a way that is not duplicating efforts. And so I would be happy to be, all dependent on what we hear back, but I'm sure there's many council members who would be interested in championing this. And I think it would be helpful to be done in a way where there's a bit of coordination so it's not too ad hoc, but given the limitations in staff resources, seeing options that involve a higher level of council involvement, I would absolutely be open to hearing that.
I participated with Maggie Hathaway on that, and I support it. And I would also suggest that if we pass a motion, that we agree to reach out to Maggie and let her know. All in favor?
Unanimous. Thank you. And thank you, Mrs. Johnson.
Motion.
Motion?
Second motion, yes. Second motion is also to get a report back on staff on the feasibility of using city spaces for a warming shelter. And so like what those could be or the feasibility of it. I'd be curious to know so that if it comes time to make the decision, we have some information to be able to make that decision.
Second, Councillor Elliott, comments?
Second the motion, and I'm a little worried about what our feasibilities look, and I'm wondering if it would require funding just to do a feasibility analysis. And so maybe the first step would be for staff to report back on what it would take to do a feasibility on something like that before we move forward with an actual decision that we want a feasibility analysis. But so that's kind of what I was thinking, is to maybe amend it to bring back on what it would take to do a feasibility analysis on that.
So maybe it's been seconded now, so too. So when I say feasibility study, I mean, my idea is, Lyft has had the experience of working with BC Housing, and they may know a little bit more about what the guidelines are and have these relationship and communication channels pretty open. And for city staff to go, what do we have that might possibly work? And kind of going from there. So I don't think it's about a full. No, I think feasibility study maybe isn't too strong of a word for what I envision. But what was that?
Suitability.
Suitability. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to get mired in semantics, but
Yeah.
Do we have anything that might be suitable? And then from there, what would it be like? What would it take to go any further? Is my intention. Yeah.
So I'd like to ask the CIO if since you asked what motion would be most appropriate to get us where we need to go.
Councillor Elliott, one option would be for staff to look at the city facility. That's where you're asking for feasibility. That makes sense. That's really what you're looking at again. What do we have? The zone has correct building code require exit valves, right? So it would probably be several departments giving input to that. And I think you've already done some work on what all the so options. If that's a better word.
A motion to amend to staff to get back to us with suitability options within the city. Is it warming or something?
Chair, if I could clarify the difference between daytime, something that's overnight in terms of so around that, or if the staff just looks at there are some different parameters. Suitability of a building daytime warming center is different than day. If we could get that, but I'm just wondering if you have some clarity right now what the need is.
Thank you. If you want, I can clarify that as well, because I think the two concepts are being confused a little bit. And I have to admit that I was confused myself and did ask BC Housing for clarity on the difference in terms of funding and operationalization of a warming center versus an emergency weather response shelter. And so an emergency weather response shelter is what BC Housing would fund to expand an existing shelter space and or open up a new kind of ad hoc shelter space with when the weather meets certain parameters, and that there's funding streams available through BC Housing for that. And that's what I'm going to learn more about this week. The warming center is not funded through BC Housing. They don't fund warming centers. It would typically be funded through a municipality, where a municipality would develop criteria for a warming center and open an existing site, or fund a community agency to open an existing site during daytime hours when those criteria are met. So that might mean opening the library on hours that it's not normally open, or the complex designated as a warming center, or funding a community center that's operated by a nonprofit operator or a community group to open as a warming center. But the city would fund that.
And I want us to stay focused on what our current resolution is.
Exactly. I have a question for the chair. It's all part of the fun when we have these ad hoc motions that come up without any written motion or anything. But my question to the chair was, what are we talking about right now? What's the motion that's on the floor? And I just want the wording of the motion, an explanation of it. What is the motion that we're talking about?
So, Deputy Corporate Officer, do you have something that resembles direction on your sheet of notes there you can share with us, please?
Yes, Chair. The motion on the floor is for staff to report back on the ability of city spaces in the warming center. From the amendment motion was talked about, but if it's not, then
I can continue. I'd like to pass that motion and let staff come back to us with a report. If we complicate it too much and add too many features, we will end up talking about it sometime in June. And if we keep it simple, perhaps staff can come back and say, here's a couple of buildings that might work according to the regulations that are out there in the world, and let's talk about that.
In that regard, I appreciate the CAO's comments specifically to what the suggested amendment was, which I take to be a simplification and consideration of keeping this within a reasonable amount of work for staff. Am I on the right track, CAO? Is that a question? Sure.
I guess one of the things is around the warming centers, because that's what the motion says. Ms. Jenkins, I think, is actually quite well, because the difference between the two. So if we keep it at warming centers, but then staff, we have to define to the China, right? Options for that case. I guess what I'm trying to look for council, when you made this motion, were you specifically thinking of an expansion of existing overnight shelter beds? But BC Housing, another option, and before daytime warming. That would just help staff.
So it was your motion.
So my intention was, I suppose, the daytime warming and the emergency shelters. And so those are two distinct things. But if there are appropriate city assets for us as a council to consider, that was my intention. So, I propose an amendment to my motion to add emergency shelter. Is that the right phrase?
Emergency weather response.
Response instead of warming shelters.
Yeah, so, I mean, if I may, I think the motion would likely be to explore sites for daytime warming centers and emergency weather response shelters. And the idea would be the criteria would probably be the same for both. The operator might be different, but you would have 24-hour potential coverage between the two, or at least some daytime and some nighttime through different funding streams.
So then to clarify my amendment, move to amend the motion to add emergency weather response shelters to the original motion.
Second, Councilor Almeida, and I think we really have had enough discussion about this. This isn't a very complex amendment. Councilor Elliott.
I'm in favor of the motion. I'm still worried about the word feasibility because it can be interpreted wrongly.
My impression was that the CAO sort of mitigated that concern.
The word option, I think, should put forward, and there seemed to be a consensus.
I'd like to call a question. All in favor
The amendments right now.
of the amendment? Just adding the two considerations instead of just the one. Is that unanimous?
I'd like to speak to that motion then,
Okay.
if that's where we're at.
Awesome.
I think Councillor Dowd had a very good point here. Staff is going to deal with this. And the further we expand this motion, the more complicated it becomes. I think keeping it simple to daytime warming centers and city facilities is probably the appropriate first step before we get into the next one. Hopefully there's some suggestions coming out of dialogue and the formation of a committee coming forward later on.
Tend to agree. I'm going to call a question on the amendment. All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes. Now to the amended motion, and Deputy Corporate Officer, do you have that clearly? To your satisfaction, can you read that for us, please?
For staff to report back on options of city spaces as daytime warming centers and emergency response shelters.
All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. And thank you very much, Ms. Jensen. So, onward. Holy smokes. Much very quick meeting. 5.1, Transit Improvement Program 3-year Transit Expansion Direct. Oh no, we're missing 4.1. Letter received August 14, 2023 from Rob Ringma, Senior Manager of Government Relations, BC Transit regarding Town Centre Mall proposed transit exchange relocation option. Mr. Ringma, thank you so much for your patience and welcome to our meeting.
That's not the letter was received.
Yeah, and I can clarify that, Chair, if you'd like me to just clarify what has transpired.
Appreciate that to start with, please, sir.
No problem. So in front of you in your council package, you do have a letter that I penned on August 14th. That report was an initial report I had sent to staff to review to ensure it was clear to staff and everyone involved what impact a potential movement of the location of the transit exchange at the Town Centre Mall could have on the overall transit system and schedule. And in summary, what you'll see is that the initial proposed location of the Town Centre Mall Transit Exchange would have meant a rerouting of our entry and exit from the mall, which would have translated to additional time those buses would spend en route trying to access and leave the mall. The challenge with that is that the Town Centre Mall Transit Exchange is our key exchange within the city. Every one of our transit routes travels through that exchange. So you can think if that proposed change was a 3 to 5 minute addition to every single route, you multiply that out by about 60 routes that come through that exchange, and it added up to additional time that would impact the schedule. So that's what you'll see in that report. You'll see some recommendations there that I think were challenging. They all involved time, and time, of course, is resources and money. Since that time, though, we've had several productive meetings with the mall owner, developer, and City of Pot River staff. And we're happy to report that we've come to an agreement that we feel will work for all parties. So I have penned an additional letter that I think staff will provide for council dated September 20th. And in that proposal, it outlines that there's a new proposed transit exchange and mall routing that would remain similar to the current bus circulation within the mall with an entrance and exit on Alberni Street, and circulation of the buses around a newly built transit exchange island. The mall owner has also graciously decided to increase the number of bus bays in that location from 3 to 4, which obviously will help to accommodate future transit expansion in the region. So at this time, we feel the mall developer, BC Transit, the City of Powder River staff have come to a good solution that will work for all parties. It won't negatively influence the transit system, nor will it negatively influence traffic at the mall or the customers that are taking transit or want to access the mall. So with the new proposed transit exchange, we feel customers will continue to have improved access to the mall, its amenities, and the transit system will continue to have a long-term exchange in order for us to operate our services out of. And that exchange will not negatively affect the time or on-time performance of the transit system in a significant way. So I think it was a good process for us to go through. We analyzed the proposal from the developer. We worked with the city staff to analyze the impacts, and then circled back with the mall and the development company that they're working with, and came up with what I believe and feel right now is a mutually agreeable solution. So I imagine you'll see my report to that effect at a future meeting, but just wanted to provide the update to that letter.
Thank you, Mr. Ringma. Actually, we are looking at a print copy that was distributed to us by our corporate officer at the beginning of this meeting of your September 20 letter. And I believe it's figure 3 that is the revised transit exchange and circulation that you're referring to. So we do have that in front of us now. And I don't know if I'm taking this as your report to us. And I'm wondering if, are we at the point where we can ask you some questions now?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. And council, questions, comments? Councilor Isaacson.
Yeah, I have a question, and it might be for planning staff or whoever has a good sense of the mall. One thing that I'm not totally clear on is the sidewalk to get from this proposed version in figure 3 to Shoppers Drug Mart and Save On. I know there will be sidewalk improvements, and so that's the one piece that I'm unclear about, whether there will be clear sidewalks or accessible routes to get to Save On and Shoppers other than through the mall. Through the mall is possible, but.
Through the chair, so what you see before you, and I'm assuming it's what I am familiar with, is going to be part of an amendment to the existing DP. So the DP was issued, talked about that a couple of months ago. This has now come in. Staff have not at this point reviewed it, but we will be having communication with the developer and talking about exactly those types of issues to ensure that we have good pedestrian connections between the bus and the mall itself.
Thank you. Councilor Almeida.
Thank you, Chair. This is acknowledged in the picture, so it could be for Mr. Ringma or for planning. You've got the acknowledgement of the liquor store loading area, and I'm just curious, for the couple of times I work next to another liquor store in town, so I see the volume of shipments that they receive, and I'm just curious if that loading truck would get in the way of a bus that needs to pass that area now.
Through the chair, I will just defer to planning, but my recollection of the last correspondence is that the mall developer has we raised that as an issue, and the mall developer has made some adjustments to that, but I would just have to refer to your planning team.
Through the chair, again, great question, and it was something that staff had identified as a challenge because the nose end of those larger vehicles sticks out into the traffic corridor. And so the developer has provided an updated drawing that actually reconfigures the loading bay altogether. And that's how the drawing you're looking at. Again, keep in mind the discussion you're having is about the BC Transit, their involvement, the location of the bus lay-by. My role as evaluating the development permit process and ensuring that my colleagues in engineering, their concerns are heard, has resulted in an update to that drawing. So it actually addresses your concerns.
Good, thank you. Councilor Isaacson.
Another question, under future considerations, bus shelters is limited or listed. And so in this current design, is there no shelter proposed at this bus stop? Or when would, I'm concerned about the elements and people feeling comfortable while they're waiting for buses and attractive way to get around. And so is shelters a part of this in this short term, or what do you mean by shelters being a future consideration?
So through the chair, again, BC Transit can supply, and actually through our agreement with the city of Powell River, we could provide shelters at our cost share rate for that exchange. I believe the key piece that we were trying to solve first was to make sure that we had a circulation and access in and out of the site that would work and not immediately affect the transit schedule. But I do recall that our discussions did turn to transit shelters, and that we're going to work with the developer and the city to see how we can get some amenities also added to that location.
Thank you, through the chair. First of all, I want to say, Mr. Rigma, it's always nice to see your face on the screen, or you're here in person dealing with the various issues in terms of transit in our community. So thank you for being here. And I want to thank you and staff and the proponent for coming up with an idea that may perhaps work for everyone, because I know the proponent is very much interested in moving his upgrade of that mall facility forward. So I really appreciate this coming in a short time period, and it's being dealt with greatly, greatly appreciated. I don't have any particular questions in terms of the design, other than it always comes down to me in these regards to a fiscal matter. So I see reference here that you would like us to okay this so you could submit a new funding request to the province. Could you please expand on that little statement a little?
Yes, so thank you, Councillor Palm, for the question through the chair. Yeah, I think there's two pieces in that letter, and I think we'll get to the second piece through the upcoming staff recommendation that's coming, which is the transit expansion request. What I can say with regards to this transit facility, the exchange at the Town Center Mall, I appreciate your comments, and yes, it's always good to get all the right people around the table and come to a resolution that works for everybody. But in terms of the actual transit mall exchange, there will be no fiscal impact. We've done our preliminary analysis. We don't feel that it will cost any additional time than what's currently in our schedule. So there will be no fiscal impact to this change. And then what we're asking for through your upcoming staff report is to consider some of our transit expansion requests that would have a fiscal impact to the city.
Thank you for that clarification. Much appreciated.
I see at the bottom of this new report, there are two recommendations. Mr. Corporate Officer, is this the appropriate time for one of us to make those motions, recommendations?
No, Chair, not at this time. The second item is in relation to an upcoming 5.1. And the first bullet is separated, as the Director of Planning indicated that it'd be. I don't think at this time there's any direction required.
Okay.
It's just correspondence.
Right. Thank you very much. So if there's no other discussion or questions, we can go on to 5.1 Transit Improvement Program, 3-year transit expansion. Mr. Director, Mr. Burdick.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So this report outlines what we just spoke of transit improvement program. Back in October of last year, Council had approved BC Transit's recommendation of additional 500 hours for service improvements in 2023 for routes 1 and 2, as well as provisions for additional 1,500 hours to improve the frequency of service on Route 1. And that was for a net cost to the city of Powell River of $178,000. Unfortunately, the province did not move forward on any expansion plans for BC Transit at that time. So now the request has come up again within their transit improvement program. to see if we could confirm the desire to expand our hours of service for transit. And again, it's that 2,000 hours for the improvements to routes 1 and 2, as well as the frequency for route 1. So now the updated cost for this, the net cost to the city of Powell River would be $184,415. And this service expansion is scheduled to commence in January of 2025. One thing to note, though, is that additional vehicles are required for these additional hours. And if the city signs the MOU and later decides to not pursue the service expansion, the lease fees for the new vehicles will be added to our operating budget for a minimum of 1 year. So today, given the uncertainties of our city's budget, council may not support the current MOU for transit expansion and await further opportunities for expansion in subsequent years. Otherwise, we're looking to sign on the MOU and endorse the expansion of hours within the service.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. Thank you for the reports and the questions. My question, so right now we're not debating and making decisions because this is committee of the whole. It'll come to council for us to do that. My question for information is, has anybody been thinking about or have any information about how the on-demand system might affect any of our plans? We are hoping, or I am hoping, their regular transit.
Oh, sorry, the sound kind of cut out there a little bit, just right at the end.
My question, I guess, is the new plan for expansion. Does it consider the coordination with on-demand, or would that have to change again in order to incorporate and meld the two?
Thank you, Councillor. Through the chair, and if staff would allow me the opportunity to address that question. So last year, BC Transit did complete a service discussion document with staff. That service discussion document is a planning document, and it aligned and tried to work with the Powell River Transit vision and goals. If you remember, that document was established by staff back in 2019, just before the pandemic. But it outlined proposed transit plan for the next several years. And the two key recommendations there were, number one, to look to improve and potentially consolidate routes 1 and 2 to achieve that 30 minutes frequency, linking kind of the key destinations in the town. So really those improvements that you see in front of you in terms of improving route 1 and 2, really those are the spine routes in the city. And then the other priority or recommendation was to explore replacing the existing Route 3, which is Upper Westview, with an expanded digital on-demand transit service. So this answer is going to be a little bit long, and I apologize for it, but it just background for some of the councillors that may not be aware. So BC Transit is clearly, we remain committed to working to support the City of Powell River with your interest in pursuing continued digital on-demand service and a BC Transit supported digital on-demand service. We have completed several digital on-demand feasibility studies to examine a number of different digital on-demand transit scenarios and their applicability at different locations. BC Transit right now is targeting, and we're at the phase now where we're going to launch phase 1 of that digital on-demand transit service. We're going to launch that in Kelowna starting in 2024. We've selected our mobility software provider, and this new service type that we're going to introduce as a provincial solution we're going to introduce it using a phased approach. So phase 1 will provide the framework We'll be able to test the operations, the vehicle type, the software solution that we've chosen, and then we would move into phase 2. So in that service discussion document, we are also clear that we could not fund a digital on-demand service in Powell River until that Kelowna phase 1 is successfully launched. So as I mentioned, that'll be in 2024. And we've developed all of the parameters for our digital on-demand service design. And then we definitely are going to look to phase 2 communities like Powell River to try to develop additional support there. So over the course of kind of this year, we'll work with our technology provider. We've chosen Via Mobility to prepare for kind of launch of this feasibility. We're past feasibility. We're into pilot mode in Kelowna. And then as we build up that relationship over the course of 2024, we'll be able to integrate on-demand planning into our other systems, our phase 2 systems throughout the province. So potential timeline for exploration of those phase 2 communities would be sometime in 2025. So the reality of why we proposed this Route 1 and Route 2 expansion of service, number one, it's in the Powell River Transit vision document, so it aligns to some good work that's been done by staff. And number two, we have a gap between now and when BC Transit will have a fully developed digital on-demand service type that we can apply to other communities. So what we wanted to put forward was something that was a priority, but also that was achievable, knowing in the background that that support of the digital on-demand service is still a key shared objective of BC Transit and the City of Powell River.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dowd.
Yeah, just go back to my opinions about the recommendations that are in front of us. And that's talks about 2,000 hours of additional service and changes to routes 1 and 2 for 2025, not 2023 or 2024. If we pass this, we'll be requesting that the province provide funds to do that in 2025. And what I see, people's discussions about what they want in transit, if anything, they want more frequent service to be able to make this service more convenient. I understand the digital on-demand service, but I think we'll be having a whole separate discussion about the digital on-demand when we come to looking at our drafts of the budget for 2024. Because I think last year, it was city taxpayers' funds paid for about half of the digital on-demand Zunga bus service, and there was a contribution from the provincial government. I thought it was BC Transit that paid for the other half, but I think that's a whole separate discussion that we'll have in our budget processes. But I'm in favor of actually going ahead with a request for that 2,000 hours of additional service to improve bus service in 2025, because I think everybody wants it. And if we don't pass this, it won't happen.
Councillor Isakson.
I have a question. So the options at the bottom of the report, option 1 is to not support the current MOU. And then at the top, the recommendation is to support. And so can you explain why?
Yeah, just given our budget issues, that was one thing that we should consider. But our recommendation is if council is comfortable to move forward and sign this MOU for the 2025 budget.
Councillor Paul.
Yeah, since we're talking money, we might as well get to the bottom line here. If we pass this motion today and it goes forward, we apply for funding for 2025, and we get into dire straits in the next couple of years, and we find ourselves backing out, how much is the cost of the lease of the buses that we would tie ourselves to?
Rob might have some answers on that one.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Palm, for your question through the chair. Just for clarity on the timelines, maybe I'll just start there, as Councillor Dowd had raised that. yeah, we would love to implement this service in 2024, but as we all know, with COVID and procurement timelines, our procurement timelines for buses have been stretched out quite further than we used to have them. And in addition, we're looking for this signed MOU here in October. We then combine all of these MOUs across the province in our application or service plan to the province. And then the province, we basically wait while they go through their budget deliberations, and we find out in typically March, late February, early March, whether or not those expansions have been approved. Once we know they're approved, then our procurement of the buses start. Obviously, trying to be stewards of the taxpayer dollar, we don't just sit on extraneous buses. We order them as needed to try to keep the services as efficient as possible. Councillor Plum, I do not have the exact number with me right now on what those lease fees would be. I can find those numbers. What I would say is that standard language in our MOU is that the proponent or our partner who decides to support the transit expansion, if they do back out, that we need to recoup the first year of lease fees. That's mainly because we will have already gone through and procured those buses. But what I can say is that there are a multitude of requests for transit resources across the province right now. We have, from BC Transit perspective, we have not seen a situation where we've actually charged those lease fees to a local government, because in most cases, there's been another willing local government to take those buses and implement some sort of expansion in their system. So there's quite a few transit requests out there. So yeah, I can follow up and get you the exact number of the lease fee component. Unfortunately, I just don't have that number in front of me right now.
Thank you for the comfort of your reply, Mr. Rigma. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. So we will move this to council, and I'm taking it that there's a bit of a time crunch, because I thought I read this was expected by the end of September. So should it go to this Thursday's council meeting?
I believe that BC Transit, would like a response in shorter order. The problem that we had is we were deliberating with the mall exchange, and there was a chance that these expansion hours would be gobbled up by the increased on the runtime, should the exchange have been in a different location and with a different orientation.
Actually, I have one question. Wasn't mentioned in the report at all, but I'm not sure if it's directly pertinent, but the buses that are coming, any chance they are electric? And where is that part of the program in BC Transit's?
We are expecting the electrical buses, but there are some issues with what was specified, the Proterra bus, and the availability of those buses. So perhaps Rob can give us an update on when we might see our electric buses start in town.
Yeah, thank you, Tor, through the chair. So BC Transit continues to move forward with our low carbon fleet program. So we've, as I mentioned to this council before, we've aligned ourselves to the BC Clean Plan. So as part of that, we actually have 10 heavy duty electric buses coming into Victoria this year. We have charging infrastructure set up, and we will be, putting those charges and those buses through their paces in Victoria, where we obviously have close access to them, and we can really get a good understanding of the capabilities of those buses and charging, mileage, etc. But we have made the commitment not to purchase heavy duty diesel buses moving forward. So what's happening now is as we procure battery electric buses, they are replacing or displacing diesel buses that are not at their end of their life. And we're moving those. Again, BC Transit has the ability to move fleet across the province. So we're doing that complex game as we speak. But we are looking right now, trying to build the calendar for what I would call our phase 2 communities. So as Tor mentioned, we're basically doing some preliminary analysis to see the availability of power, availability of facility space in a lot of our kind of outside of Victoria properties, with the intention that we will start to implement additional battery electric buses into fleets across the province in the coming years. So yeah, I think there'll be some good news to come for quite a few communities in the next year or so.
Great, thank you very much. So to council for this recommendation.
Yeah, I was going to move the recommendation that council support the city signing a memorandum of understanding. MOU. Oh, so all we need to do is
Through the chair, just refer the recommendation to council. And it'll be this Thursday.
refer the recommendation to council as written.
Great, by unanimous consent. Seeing unanimous, thank you. And thank you very much, Mr. Ringma. Really appreciate your diligence and good service to us over many years. And thank you for coming today.
No, I appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you all in person next time.
I also have to add to what Councillor Plum said. It is very relieving that you have found this solution for the main exchange up at the Townsite Mall. That's or the Town Center Mall. That's a huge relief. I was a bit worrying that initial report that we read. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that good work. Great.
No problem. And thanks to staff. They were a big component in that whole process as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay. On to 5.2 Heritage Procedures Bylaw, Director of Planning Services.
Good afternoon, Chair, Mayor, and Council. Thank you very much for having me here today. The purpose of my report is to consider and discuss and receive direction with regards to the drafting of a heritage procedures bylaw. The reason for this is that while the city has objectives and policies in place that speak to heritage and heritage conservation, the city does not currently have a procedures bylaw to address development applications with respect to heritage, nor procedures to facilitate heritage conservation. And so in light of this, staff are recommending that council give direction to proceed with the drafting of a heritage procedures bylaw, with the intention being that we will have a clearly defined and consistent procedure for city staff, council, and potential applicants to be mindful of when they consider a heritage application. When we consider the history of Powell River, much of it is very much connected to its founding as a single industry pulp and paper mill community. This is most evident in the Townsite neighborhood area, where many, which is the site of the paper mill, but also the location of many of the city's first homes, buildings, and structures. Many of these properties remain standing, and the town site's historic boundaries remain intact. In fact, today we have approximately 400 buildings, original buildings that remain standing in the area, and 97% of the buildings and structures in the area were constructed before the 1940s. And so these buildings and their connection to the history of Powell River make them the source of immense local pride and affection for a lot of people. And so this recognition of Townsite for its historical significance extends to the provincial and national levels, when in 1995, Townside received designation as a National Historic District. If I understand it, it remains the first such district in BC, and if I'm not mistaken, it remains the only such district in Western Canada. In the following years, since 1995, a number of properties in the city have received varying degrees of historical recognition. Today, we have 9 properties listed on the Community Heritage Register, 6 of which have received heritage designation. I think it's important at this time to make the distinction between heritage recognition and heritage designation. Recognition does not afford a building, property, and/or site permanent legal protection. That can only occur if a property, site, or building receives heritage designation. So that means that even if a building has heritage recognition, the property owner can very easily reconfigure and/or demolish the building in such a way as to irreversibly destroy the heritage character and/or value of their property. And to do that would be inconsistent with existing city policy that speaks to the adaptive reuse and the enhancement of heritage assets, nor does it align with existing policy that speaks to the retention of heritage, historic context within Townside. In order to address this gap in heritage conservation protection, one of the solutions would be to draft a heritage procedures bylaw. This is a document that would delegate the duties and responsibilities and powers of council to the planning director to facilitate conservation. This could look like the withholding or issuing of permits, requiring that there be heritage inspections, and also engaging in or entering into a heritage revitalization agreement. A heritage procedures bylaw will also contain language to govern the different procedures and legal tools by which we can begin heritage conservation. There will also be language in there that provides property owners with a very clear pathway if they wanted to have their property legally protected and or listed in the Heritage Exchange. I think it's important to note at this time that if we were to proceed with the drafting of such a bylaw, it would only concern or have an impact on existing protected heritage property in the city. And so the legal basis or the statutory basis by which we are able to consider heritage conservation within land use planning can be found in Part 15 of the Local Government Act. In light of the above, the recommendation is to receive direction to proceed with the drafting of a heritage procedures bylaw. While staff do not anticipate that there will be major construction and or renovation within town site, it's the opinion of staff that it would be prudent to have such a bylaw in place prior to the receipt of heritage application. This is very much a proactive posture that's being adopted by the city if the decision is made to proceed with the drafting of this bylaw. In closing, I'm happy to answer any questions, comments, or concerns from members of council. Thank you.
Thank you. What a great report. I appreciate it. I think this is the first report.
This is my first time.
To council. Yeah, wonderful to have you with us.
Thank you.
Questions from council, Councilor Elliott.
So am I to understand that this bylaw would only impact those buildings that are on that already have a designation?
Through the chair, sorry, to Councilor Elliott. That is correct. Yes.
Councilor Almeida.
Chair, I'm not sure, Drew, if this question would be appropriate for you or for Director Gao. I guess a couple questions. I'm all in favor of this bylaw, but it helped that this item on the agenda, along with the prodding of a member in the community had me look into a little bit more of heritage stuff, and having lived in Burnaby, close to New West, and being part of the New West Heritage Homes tour that they do on a regular basis over there. I was curious, I guess, kind of on the proactive note that you mentioned, two things, I guess. How would this impact as we're getting into our new community plan in terms of heritage protection? And then is there an appetite, we'll say, to take this a step further with a maybe a community-based heritage commission, partly serviced by a couple members of council, to continue and expand on the practice so that it's not just on the onus of staff, but that we have a community-based committee that is reporting back, and whether that's adding other buildings to the registrar or what may be. But other historic communities in our province have such commissions, and I'm wondering if we need to take that step as well.
Through the chair, that's a great question. I think just to address your second point with regards to the establishment of a heritage commission, the drafting of a heritage procedures bylaw would not at this time establish said commission. However, if the decision is made to proceed with the drafting of such a bylaw, it would also not preclude the establishment of a heritage commission at a future date. And so if it's the desire and intention of council to direct staff to kind of look into that further, that's definitely something that we can do. I think with regards to your first question and how this work might impact the OCP work that we're going to or have begin some of our preliminary work with, I think it's definitely something that we'll touch upon in as we kind of get further along in that process. I think it's still early days, but that's something we can definitely look into if that's the desire of council as well.
So my second question is, I'm a little bit worried about, we're trying to take care of the public interest of heritage in privately owned buildings. Sometimes this can create a situation where it's very difficult for property owners to improve their properties. And I'm wondering, is there any way for folks to have funding to help support the buildings so that they don't become in a state of disrepair because they can't afford to do things the correct way? And I don't know if this bylaw helps us get access to those kinds of fundings for property owners or not, or do you have any information about that?
Through the chair to Councillor Elliott, just with regards to your question around repairs and any potential additional red tape or burdens to property owners, I can assure you that if the decision is made to proceed to drafting of a heritage procedures bylaw, that this is a bylaw that strictly concerns procedures. And so it's more of a how bylaw as opposed to what. And so there won't be any infringements, or we won't be taking away any rights and privileges to existing property owners. I can, the owners of the 6 designated properties, they kind of came forward to do that voluntarily. That wasn't something that, we kind of imposed on them. And, we kind of worked very closely with them to make sure that they were aware of some of the different provisions and requirements that, had to be met when it came to getting designated status. I think to your point about funding, I don't believe at this time that a heritage procedures bylaw would have any sort of mechanism in place to provide funding to property owners. I think there are different mechanisms that would be in a heritage procedures bylaw that would help or incentivize property owners to protect their buildings. And so something that was, I believe, mentioned very briefly is one of the legal tools would be a heritage revitalization agreement. This is an agreement. It's a formal written agreement between the city and a property owner, wherein the city would provide some sort of non-financial incentive to encourage property owners to conserve their properties. So in terms of what that actually looks like, it could be variations to existing bylaws or permits, or supplements to existing bylaws or permits.
Through the chair. One thing that council does have the option to do is to consider, and it may be something to look at once you've received the draft consideration, is look at what you want to establish British facade improvements, and that can be not only to the density, but to other to the very helpful. Like that, just something.
I have a Councillor Paul.
Sorry, Chair, I just have to ask one important question. That is, this is the only site in Western Canada that exists in this type of fashion, correct? As you stated earlier?
Through the chair, I believe that is correct, yes.
So this is a jewel. There's no doubt about it. So my question is, in terms of vacant land and perhaps buildings going up on vacant land in this designated area, are there any heritage specifications that they have to follow at this present time?
Through the chair, unfortunately, I do not have an answer to that question, but I can commit to following up on that and getting you an answer in quick time.
I only ask that because, you know, the school district, the Bellbrook Secondary, when I was still employed by that organization, did a great job of fashioning that school in a heritage style with wooden beams and outdoor amenities that suited the area. So that's an important aspect of that town site location. So hopefully we're looking at that as we proceed down the road. Thank you.
I have a question. I would say, oh, Mayor.
The question, the town site has a national heritage designation. Does this proposal put forward by staff have anything to do to changes that could affect our continuing to have that designation?
Through the chair to the mayor, as far as I'm aware, proposed changes would not have an impact on the current status that town site enjoys as a national historic district.
Thank you.
Good question. I attended various consultations that Ms. Ferguson conducted on the past year and a half or so. I think it was about a year and a half ago in the summer. It had to do with, some of which had to do with exactly this question. And I thought that there was expected to be some outcome that would possibly result in a requirement. I understood it to be a development permit area requirement to for original houses in the residential area in the town site to have to consult with planning staff before renovations or changes were made to the appearance. And I'm just, I know that's relevant, but and I'm really curious as what the status of that is.
Yeah, we share to Council Subcott. So we have two development permit areas in town sites. Development permit area for the commercial areas and development permit area 11 for areas. The one that you're referring to is the consultation we did to develop the development. And so their current, and this also addresses your question too, that for area or lands that are in those designated development permit areas, there are forming yards and guidelines. They encourage property owners or require property owners to build uniform methods, keeping with heritage style, but it's not to the level of rigidity or specificity that you would see in heritage. So the current provision plan for 2014 says that the town site be a major heritage conservation area. That's a discussion we're willing to have with the community again as we go through a comprehensive update to see what the temperature is on establishing a person conservation area in the future. When we did the development firm area consultation, there wasn't big appetite. So we'll check in again on that. But the good news is that the heritage procedures bylaws sets us up either way. If we're doing heritage alteration permits for designated buildings, one of the crazy process to put things on the register costs that if there was a future person.
Thank you very much. I see we, Councilor Maynard? Oh, no questions. This committee delegated to, thank you. Please do, sir.
Okay, well, I have a slight adjusted motion with an assist to our corporate officer. So in relation to my previous comment. So I would move that staff be directed to prepare a draft heritage procedures bylaw to support conservation of designated heritage assets and include comments related to establishing a heritage commission.
We need to make that as a, does that need to be an amendment?
Chair, that's the motion Councilor made is putting forward.
Okay, seconder? Seeing no second.
So
Councilor Elliott.
I would move the recommendation as written in the report, and I would encourage a second separate motion around the second piece, simply because they're different things.
Would you like to read that, please?
I move that staff be directed to prepare a draft heritage procedures bylaw to support conservation of designated heritage assets.
Second, Councilor Isaacson, discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. Okay, Councilor Almeida.
All right, try this again. I will move that staff prepare, I guess, a report on the basis of establishing a heritage commission, similar to New West and others.
Seconder? Oh, yeah. Discussion on this?
Yeah. No, I probably am in favor of establishing a heritage commission, but I'm not in favor of talking about heritage commissions when we don't all know what we're talking about. I'd like to have some background from staff about the definition of a heritage commission, what their powers might be, what the costs of doing that, the impact of a heritage commission on people who have buildings in that community. Going to be a positive or negative? Is it going to cost them money? Is it going to limit their rights? And how do we do that? I'm perfectly prepared to consider it, but I think we should take our time, make sure we know what we're talking about. We're putting up our hands and saying, let's do this and let's have staff recreate this, that, and everything. I think it's a little bit too much without having a report just on the background. Because I have attended some of those discussions. I see townsite ratepayers folks are, one of the townsite ratepayers folks are here. I know that the planning department has had considerable public input from the people in townsite about whether or not they want a commission and whether or not they want that much regulation. So I think we should take our time before we just jump right into it and say, write a report on how to do it.
Okay, just before we go to Councillor Isaacson, I have a question of staff, and that is, have we not had some reporting to do with the Heritage Commission in the past? I have somewhere back in the files of my, just before we start reinventing the wheel here.
Sorry, Chair. There has been discussions between a number of the different ratepayer groups and Heritage Society over the years. I think it would be a great opportunity for staff to bring back information, background information, the pros and cons, I think is what I heard, and the bigger picture. I think part of it is also in line with considering heritage conservation area, which is really the bigger rationale for why you would have a heritage commission. I'm not suggesting you couldn't have a heritage commission with 6 buildings on the registry and 9 altogether. But really, it's typically in keeping with that larger piece of the puzzle, which, as Ms. Ferguson alluded to, the temperature wasn't there when we went out to do engagement on the development permit area a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think, I mean, as speaking to Director Gow's comments on, I just changed your job title. Demoted, yes. Mr. Chancellor. Like in general, you know, do I support something, especially if there is this, you know, a designated conservation area? I'm pretty picky on what to direct planning staff to do at this moment. I know I put some, you know, made some motions to put stuff on their plate earlier tonight, and this is not something at this time I'm willing to support. It's not that it wouldn't matter in the future, but I don't think we're at a place yet where it matters. And so, and I'm not convinced yet to support this.
Councilor Paul.
Yeah, I will just, through the chair, second that comment that I believe our planning staff has plenty of work on their plate at this present time. I don't want to overburden the capacity that they possess.
I have a comment. We don't have it yet, but in the past term, we had we called it an action list a long time ago. And then it became our strategic plan.
Action list.
Yeah, something else. Was it an action list?
It was.
And I like this idea, and things get done when they can get done. So it's up to staff to prioritize. And I personally support this motion. Councillor Almeida.
Thank you, Chair. I think to answer Councillor Dowd's point, I don't want staff to put a lot of time into it. And even Director Gow said we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We have other communities that have a similar commission along with their procedures bylaw. I think a couple of phone calls or emails might get staff a couple quick answers and commission's procedures that are already set up that we have the benefit of leaning on some other communities. So, and then they can, as Director Gow said, give us the viability on what would work and not work and then report back to us and then we can decide from there.
CAO, thank you, Councillor Almeida.
So, to councillors, the chair to council, on the thought, we're going to using the big directive, probably should go into the engagement with different people. And the opportunity to determine we can want to what the other thing about 55 and that may then guide us back to and so then we do the engagement upfront, as Mr. Gals pointed out, for the 6 properties, it's a very small amount. So it's wrapped in that way, get the feedback from the neighborhoods, work coming back to you. It's just a thought.
So if I hear you correctly, you're suggesting that this could be included in the OCP work as a whole.
The chair, with all respect, I'm looking at the conversation here. It is a natural fit because we're doing and asking people what's work for the future, not only as it allows to do that. So,
that satisfies me. Does it satisfy you?
Yeah, and I think there's a key member in the gallery today who can spread that word if he wants to get a little bit more attention from the community too.
I see him too. So if we fail this, then it will default to that OCP word. I'll call a question. All in favor? That's unanimous. I will. No, I guess I do have to ask all opposed. Good, thank you. Motion fails unanimously. Back to, okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wu.
Sure.
Awesome. And the planning department in general. 5.3, community engagement reports. Who would like to start? Councilor Almeida.
Thank you, Chair. Simple for me. I just had the library board meeting yesterday, which was good. Not much to report at this time. Any major developments, but the library's doing well. Actually, well, one major development is September normally is a slower period of time for the library, or kids are getting back into school. They don't normally get the big jump, but the chief librarian reported that the numbers in September were higher than anticipated, and she's comparing a lot of numbers to pre-COVID times just to really get an actual comparison. And overall numbers seem to be going up. Programs are going up, and a lot of youth children accessing the library as well. So it's well good, and I'm sure our next committee meeting there'll be more to present as we get back in the swing of things now.
Thank you.
I don't think anything to report for me. I'm looking at my calendar. I was visiting family the past week, so mostly doing that.
So Doug.
All right, well, it seems like just yesterday we were making this report, but actually we had a week off last week from council meetings. I went to and attended the Wildwood Ratepayers Association on Thursday night. There were lots of questions. Everybody wanted to talk about taxes and what's upcoming, and I encourage people to actually participate more in our consultation processes and that they look on city's website, which I suggest everybody look at the city's website and look at the opportunities that are coming up to have input into our budget discussions this year. So I think it will be one of the most probably controversial budget discussions we've had since I've been attending council meetings. And I think we could be looking at some serious questions about what services the city is going to be able to provide, and making some hard choices. Transit's one of them. How many bylaws we can create is another. One of the questions that I kept getting over and over again was, hey, Councillor Dowd, what's going on down by Second Beach with all that logging by the wastewater treatment plant? I discovered this evening that was being done by the city engineering department. Because there had been some concern about dead trees falling over in that area. So I went down and looked at it. There's a pretty significant area below the old golf course and I guess south of the wastewater treatment plant that has been clear cut in there. And it turns out that was a city operation. So the thing, a couple of days ago when I was driving from Wildwood into town, I was going through the cut there between town site and Wellington Beach. And I thought, boy, there's some dangerous looking trees in here. And then when I made my run to the dump yesterday, what do you know, the road was closed because a tree had come down. Closed the road, and I understand cut off power to a little bit of the town. The logging at the wastewater treatment plant was a big issue, and the issue that everybody wanted to talk about at Wildwood Ratepayers was going to happen at tax time. So I encourage everybody to come out and participate. I really would like people to fill up the chairs at City Hall when we have our draft 1, 2, and 3 discussions on the financial plan, rather than waiting until March when it's a couple of days before of it, and letting us know your opinion there. Come out and participate in the process.
I was at that Wildwood Ratepayers meeting as well, and I was entertained by Councillor Dowd mentioning that I think only 3 people turned up at the consultation that was organized by our finance department. Thank you, Ms. CAO, for all your hard work there. And a number of councillors attended that as well, not me because I had a cold. So I also attended the townsite ratepayers. These ratepayers are meetings are a great way to find out what's going on in the community because people who are interested turn up at those meetings. And those two groups are particularly fruitful for me in that regard. I also attended our emergency planning committee meeting last week, and the topic was earthquake, which none of us have much thought about for about 3.5 years. But prior to that, it was the #1 hazard on the emergency planning committee's list. And that is a multi-agency and multi-city and regional department committee. So there were many organizations represented on that committee. So the big news is the day after tomorrow, on the 19th of October at 10:19 in the morning, is the big shakeout exercise. And everybody's alarm should go off because we should set those alarms for 10:19 on Thursday morning. And then when our alarms go off, we need to, cover and hold on. There's 3 steps to that. My goodness. I sent out a link to all of council. Duck, cover, and hold on. So we get under a solid chair. And there's some misinformation that's gone on from less developed countries over years that you get up near a wall or something like that. With our building codes, buildings do not collapse the way they do where we don't have building codes like we do in Canada. And the direction really is get under a solid table and wait until the shaking stops. So that is the day after tomorrow, Thursday at 10:19 in the morning. Yes, and I'm sure everybody here is going to do that, right? Okay, one more thing that I wanted to mention is that tomorrow, Wednesday, a local group called Energy Democracy for BC, which is concerned with power generation in our region, in other words, Lois and Powell, they're having their AGM and they are having a guest, Dr. Gary Merkel, who was involved in the formation of the Columbia Basin Trust. We did have another visitor here a number of months ago, Corky Evans, who was also involved in that. There is strong interest in our community in what the Columbia Basin Trust provides. Many, many millions of dollars, I think it's 80 plus, for the communities in the Columbia Basin annually as a dividend from the revenues from the Columbia Treaty. So it's a pretty amazing project. Dr. Merkel was the chair of the board from 2007 to 2013, and as I said, involved in the formation of the trust. So it was very informative, and I think that meeting will probably be pretty interesting. It is going to be at the library at 7 p.m. So that's tomorrow, Wednesday, October 18th, 7 p.m. library. And that's my report. Maybe we'll give you the last opportunity. Over to Councillor Fong.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I've been entertaining my grandkids and my daughter past week, and I got a cold as a result of that, so I was down all weekend. But I've been fielding a couple of phone calls recently. One was on the regards to the Seawalk, and I did a little staff dialogue on that one, and I'm happy to report that Mr. Mike Caban, through our Parks and Rec, is on that, and he's moving our archaeological studies forward so that the reconstruction of that Seawalk can take place in the foreseeable future. So that's a positive step forward as to why it's taken so long. So that's the good news. And secondly, I'll just bring this since Councillor Doubt brought up taxes. And somebody called me to give me a creative idea as to how we could help city coffers. And that was through the utilization perhaps of our community forest. We could go into Millennial Park and thin out some of the growth in that park, take the value from trees, apply it to the city coffers, and help that forest rejuvenate itself and even look much better than it is today. So that's an idea that perhaps we need to take a look at. So I'll leave it at that, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Paul. Councillor Hillier.
Thank you. First of all, I have a question to everybody with regards to your report, Councillor Southcott. So tomorrow's a big drill for shape. Thursday?
Thursday.
Okay. So I was thinking it was tomorrow and that I would be scheduled to be in the swimming pool for an exercise class. And that got me thinking, do all of our facilities participate? Do our recreational facilities have process to advise everybody that's there at the time of the drill what they should be doing? And so that was kind of, I got curious about that, our public spaces that have visitors during a drill such as this. Are we practicing what to do with all of our public when there's an earthquake? So that was a question I had. Do we know? Do we know? Okay.
The chair to council, something that's we can find out. I suspect not. Particularly local government staff and possibly facilities.
We'd have to confirm with Director of Parks, Rec and Culture in terms to see what they have in place, but staff would be made aware, and we have social media posts that go out. In terms of concerted efforts.
Chair, there's some municipalities that have alert systems, so if they get something on the phone, that triggers their response, no matter what they are. Something to show that.
With my report. I'm curious about that. So I attended that post-secondary planning steering committee kickoff. So they, Vancouver Island University has cobbled a group of folks together for planning post-secondary education for our community from in the future. And they asked me to attend, and I did. And I think they're going to be coming with a formal response or a formal request for somebody on council to be on the steering committee. And I let them know that council would decide who would ultimately sit there, but I'd be happy to fill the chair until we get to that, because it was kind of a last minute request. So I really very much enjoyed the steering committee meeting, and I think it's an excellent process for our city. They're looking at how to best serve the needs of our community for post-secondary education, and maybe looking at things that are maybe not working and hoping to improve them and be a little more responsive. There was a lot of discussion around how we can bring education when you don't have a full classroom. How do people in our community get the education they need for the career paths that they would desire without having to leave the community? And so getting creative around that. There was the concept or an idea thrown out there about being a center of excellence for a particular subject matter at our campus. And I really liked that idea. That was bandied about. Anyway, so the steering committee is going to be meeting monthly for the next while, and we had an outline of what they want to do. And I think we'll, at some point, council will appoint a permanent person to sit in that chair. And in the meantime, I've volunteered to do so. So I've been doing that. I met with a few community folks. One of them was Chris Cornell, who's a veteran, he was a delegation here and advocates for the over on the cadets. He advocates for the cadets. He was really concerned about our policy for permissive tax exemptions and how it's impacting some of the smaller organizations that really rely on them in order to provide really good services. We provide recommendations that our policy in the future do assess for how much these smaller organizations are giving back to the community and have that as part of our criteria. He wanted to point out that not all of the organizations give back to the community at the same level, and perhaps organizations could be rated in some way as far as benefit back to the community and not necessarily treated the same, so that our dollars are going to the best place possible. I heard what you had to say. I made sure that I told him that we're definitely looking at policy changes for that in the future, and that the public would get a crack at providing input. I would hope in policy development that we do. I met with our I also the AGM at the Therapeutic Riding went very well. I attended the opening night for curling for Friday, and also last night for Monday Ladies. I got to do that as well. So with the long weekends that we've been having all in a row, I've also had lots of time with my family.
Oh. Got an opportunity to meet with the president of Westview Ratepayers and members, and gas pricing in Powell River was seen as an important issue. So they asked me if I would attend the October 30th meeting of the Westview Ratepayers. And I said I'd be glad to, as long as Pieta Woolley would come along, because I had worked with her in the past about trying to rationalize why our gas pricing is so high. So if anybody is interested, there will be a meeting on October 30th, the Westview Ratepayers, and it should be a good discussion. Also at the same time, we had a chat about the Energy Democracy meeting, which Councillor Southcott had mentioned, which is tomorrow night. And I had attended the previous meeting where Corky had talked about Columbia Basin. And so what I've agreed to do is at that meeting, listen and see whether or not I could bring a recommendation back to council that we might play a leading role in bringing the various interested parties together to see if we can facilitate getting benefit for all communities that are in the vicinity of those dams. I met with Eagle Waltz and some of his associates at PAWS, and as a result, we arranged to get some funding for a helicopter drop at Tin Hat and also Waltz Hill. So there was an issue that they had lost some of the transportation routes up there, and everybody's quite happy because the key thing is to get the pellets so that if you're staying up there in the middle of the winter, you got some pellets to keep you warm. I did attend Stephen Miller's Townsite Actors Guild, and was very encouraged. I'd always liked what they did, so I went and auditioned for a part in their Christmas play, and they managed to find one that was really, really simple, so I'm going to encourage everybody to buy tickets and come out and watch. The Kings are playing tomorrow night. Again, I've had an opportunity over the weekend to meet more parents of the players that are here. And it's just great to hear from them that they had no idea what Powell River was. When they came out here, they can say, wow, we're going to come back here, because one of them was really keen on hiking. So I put the pitch in for Tin Hat and the trail that goes from Sultry Bay through past Lund. I met with a couple of concerned citizens that had issues around bylaws and suites. So I forward that on to our CAO and staff And they are very pleased that they got a fairly quick response. So I think that's a great form of community engagement when people have an issue and they know that they can get a response back. And finally, you had mentioned in the discussion on earthquakes. So when I first moved to Powell River, I was concerned till I talked to my real estate agent that says, well, here's the way it works. If you can get insurance for earthquake, almost no chance an earthquake's going to occur. If you can't get it, then you're in real trouble. So when I found out that they were willing to give me earthquake insurance here in Powell River, I felt very comfortable. But we should still find something to hide under on Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah.
Since you burst the bubble on making some announcements before our Thursday session, did want to give our planning staff a little bit of a plug because tomorrow before the energy meeting at 7, planning is running a session for here in Chambers for anyone interested in manufactured homes, modular homes, or mobile homes. So it's an open house, 4 to 6 p.m. happening tomorrow here in Chambers if you're curious about any of those structures. So I'm sure they would appreciate more bodies in attendance.
Thank you very much. I have one short comment with respect to CAO's mention of the notification system in some communities. It exists here as well. And by going into the regional district, the Cathet Regional District's website and going to the emergency preparedness page, there is a sign up. So we can receive notifications on our cell phones should anything happen. So that's a highly advisable thing to do. It also is the system that the regional emergency planning program depends on to let people know should there be necessity for evacuation one way or the other or of the area. So
I just wanted to add to what you're saying. Whenever I post regional district stuff and share it on Facebook, it's my daily reminder that the city is a member of the regional district. And if you feel like the city's not doing something on emergency planning, it's because it's the regional district's responsibility. And as a member of the regional district, they take on that function for everyone in the region, including the city. So my regular plug, the city is a member of the regional district and they are not separate from us, we are part of them.
Thank you. Well, seeing nothing else, we go on to questions. Mr. Clinton.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of procedural questions. With regard to the delegation 3.1 on the homeless count, there were some motions that arose out of that particular presentation. I did not hear those motions, and so I'm hoping the Deputy Corporate Officer can email those to me. I see some head nodding, so I'll take that as a yes. And also, Chair, with regard to item 4.1, which was a presentation from Rob Ringma, there was a mention of a September 20th letter, and I'm hoping to procure a copy of that. Oh, I see there's a bunch around here. I see the corporate officer has one for me, so thank you very much. Those are my questions, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Glinsky. Your service is much appreciated. Mr. Sion, anybody online or on the telephone as far as questions go? Maybe we'll check with you in a few minutes. Any questions from our wonderful gallery of people who have stayed this whole meeting? Okay, seeing none. None online, none on the phone. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Isaacson, second Councillor Doubt. Mr. Corporate Officer.
I understand that you will be returning to closed session. So what I'd suggest is that Council pass a motion in an open meeting to continue. You've already done so?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you suggest that resolution or that motion?
Out of abundance of caution, I'd suggest just pass it another motion.
Hey, would somebody like to move that we go to closed meeting? And do we need to cite the section 20 or section 90? Councillor Elliott,
I could read the original motion.
thank you.
I move that following adjournment of this regular meeting, we'll move into a closed meeting to discuss matters covered for the community charter under section T1, the security of the property of the municipality, litigation or potential litigation affecting the municipality, the receipt of advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, and the consideration of whether a council meeting should be closed under the provision of this subsection or subsection 2. And I realized I left out the DGI of the sections, but sorry about that.
Seconder, Councillor Isaacson, discussion, seeing none, all in favor? Unanimous, thank you. Motion passes. Motion to adjourn, Councillor Peter, Councillor Isaacson, all in favor? Unanimous. Motion adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for